Chapter 18. Confinement 2-4. Chapter 9. Confinement 2-4. 1995, 1996. Percy is 19 and 32. Severus is 34. Harry is 15. The Dark Lord is, by some accounts, 1. You are staring at me, Tom snaps the next evening, interrupting the still and heavy silence that invades Percy's flat at all times. Percy flinches. He'd thought he was out of sight at the small table he'd wedged inside his half-kitchen, which he felt was more civilized than eating at the counter. He had been staring at Tom, watching him as he leafed through some of the volumes that Percy had painted for him. Percy left the ones behind Tom's body blank, of course, since he had only traced their vague shapes with charcoal and not painted them explicitly, and it seems that some combination of Percy's and Tom's magic has materialized them into being. Tom is reading a tome that looks uncomfortable, similar to the book that Malfoy lent to him, but despite Percy craning his head, he cannot see the title. Sorry, Percy says hastily, turning back to his food. He's really got to stop eating takeaway ministry food for all meals, but he just does not have the time or energy to cook anymore. I can move if you'd like, or like Snape said, we can move you to my Gringotts vault. Who are you? Tom says after a beat, his voice marginally warmer. I'm afraid you have me at an advantage. You know much about me, it seems, but I know very little about you. Percy hesitates and then brings his plate into the portion of the room he's generously termed the main parlor, containing his couch, the portrait, a chair, and a small side table. My name is Percy. Percy Weasley. I'm 2 years out of Hogwarts. I discovered your diary in my 6th year. Lucius Malfoy, that's Abraxas' son, is enemies with my father, and he gave the diary to my younger sister as a form of revenge. Tom hisses sharply. He gave a Horcrux to a child. Percy knows the outrage has nothing to do with the implication that a child was affected by an incredibly dark object, but rather everything to do with the disgrace of Tom's soul being parceled out like candy. He does not know what it was, I believe, Percy says. It is a very odd experience to defend Lucius Malfoy. And his son hates your father, Tom says musingly. Weasley, I do not know much about the Weasley family. There is not much to know, Percy says. With Tom, he does not try to hide his resentment. If anything, he tries to make it clear, knowing it endears him to Tom. My family is poor. They're all blood traitors, licking Dumbledore's boots. Dumbledore is still alive. Percy knows that look in Tom's eyes intimately, the way his voice is all the more dangerous for how light and casual it sounds. Rules our society, Percy says, flicking a glance over his plate at Tom's painted form. Nobody dares stand up to him. He claims he defeated you. Tom smiles slowly, dangerously, the curve of his jaw reminding Percy of the languorous way the basilisk stretched its neck into the air. He will be surprised when I return then. You are taking being in a portrait rather well, Percy observes. The smile disappears from Tom's face. I know I am a portrait, he says, examining his painted hand. I can feel it, the limits of my power. But I feel the Horcrux too, and the memory of what I was once. What good is it to rage and storm against what I cannot control? I will return, and if things are as dire as you say, I will be ready. He is different from Diary Tom, calmer, older, more focused. And yet the true difference is between Tom and the Dark Lord. When Snape speaks of him, he does so with reservation but not reverence. Percy had only seen the Dark Lord once or twice in those dark days toward the end, excepting, of course, the Battle of Hogwarts, and he remembers how even the sight of the Dark Lord's strange, reptilian features was enough to make Percy's stomach curl, how he magic rolled out of him in thickly moving waves that felt heavy and sticky to the touch, how erratic he was. Percy has no doubt that Tom at any age was dangerous, but the younger Toms he has interacted with are significantly more controlled. Can I ask a question, Tom? Percy ventures hesitantly. I spoke to you, well, the diary very often, you see, and you were not quite sure what you intended to do after Hogwarts, but it was so apparent that whatever it was would be incredible. But all of my research of you, and obviously I am sure you covered your tracks well. But even now, I'm just wondering. Out of school, I pursued knowledge, Tom says, cutting Percy off smoothly. He leans back in his painted chair, and though there is no physical desk between them, Percy feels acutely as though he is in the office of one of his professors. I traveled the world. I studied magic. I saw things you would never dream of, wonders and horrors so immense to even think of telling of them would be foolish. Where are those things, those wonders and horrors? How had Tom found them without a family, without a mentor, without anything except for his own drive? Percy swallows but says nothing. I only recently decided to return to Britain and set some of my other plans in motion, Tom continues. I have knowledge, all of it. What I seek now is power. But why? Percy dares to insist. To what end? Power for nothing is not power unless wielded. Tom considers him thoughtfully. I disagree. Percy wants to argue, but he wants Tom to trust him more, so he subsides in what he hopes is a respectful manner. And Hogwarts, you went there to interview to be a professor. Tom raises an eyebrow and crosses one leg over the other. If you found my diadem at Hogwarts, then I imagine you know why I went to Hogwarts. So you never intended to work there at all. I would never put myself that close to Albus Dumbledore, hisses Tom, and the hatred twisting his face into a grimace makes him seem suddenly alive, suddenly much closer to the Dark Lord that Percy remembers. But Hogwarts will be mine, one day. But Tom does not divulge either the locations or the particulars of the other Horcruxes. Percy makes a point to talk to him each day, though to his surprise, and if he's being honest, a frisson of disappointment. He does not feel that Tom enjoys talking to him very much, preferring to read whatever books his magic creates on the shelves. He seems not to be the only one with better things to do than speak with Percy. Tonks has all but disappeared from the ministry, and even Crouch is rarely in his office, appearing only at random intervals to request something of Percy, and then disappearing. Fudge is a more reliable figure, consistently blustering in interviews and meetings alike, but Percy can only draft so many interviews before he ends up recycling all of his old material. Cedric's letters are cheery and full of veiled references to the defense club he is supervising, interspersed with funny anecdotes about the advanced study of herbology. Even Mathilda and Liam seem to be swept up into the social club of young government employees, meeting for pints and bites after work, though neither seem particularly inclined to invite Percy. Percy, in a moment of weakness, points out to Liam in full earshot of the rest of the bullpen, including Mr. Crouch, that if Liam thinks that a pureblood like Mathilda is going to give Liam the time of day, he is sorely mistaken. Percy works for the next week out of Fudge's office, embarrassed by his outburst, though he has to admit the deep flush on Liam's face was satisfying to see, despite himself. As October darkens into November, Cedric's letters begin to be increasingly sparse, and he implies heavily that he is afraid that Umbridge is monitoring the post. Percy privately doubts this. Whenever he hears from Umbridge, it rather seems like she's barely able to keep her hand on the school, special decrees notwithstanding. It would take a more skilled witch than she to meddle with the Hogwarts owls, and Percy cannot imagine she has the time to personally read everyone's correspondence. But he defers to Cedric's paranoia, and the next time he has a letter for Cedric, explaining in explicit detail why shield wards are better than shield charms, though of course an understanding of the latter is a prerequisite for the former, he goes to Priscilla Diggory for help in smuggling the letter. Percy cannot imagine asking one of his classmates to send him post via his mother, but he supposes that Cedric has a rather different relationship to Priscilla than Percy does to Molly, whose silence grows icier every day. It's a good precaution, Priscilla compliments him, forestalling the long and complex excuse Percy had prepared to explain why he could not simply mail Cedric himself. I'll slip the letter in a care package I'm sending Cedric. The bastards won't find it. Cedric believes packages are being searched as well, Madam Diggory, Percy says cautiously. While Percy can justify writing to Cedric, given Cedric's apparent neutrality and interest in magical study, Percy does not think he can explain concealing a letter in a package. She scoffs at him. I married Amos against the express wishes of my family. I know perfectly well how to hide a letter to a man. Well, I thank you, Madam Diggory, replies Percy, discomfited. He glances around him, looking for something else to say. Her new house is impeccably clean, nothing like the gentle clutter that Percy vaguely remembers from the Diggory residence. He can't help but notice the fireplace in the kitchen has been bricked up, and he drags his gaze away from it uncomfortably. Priscilla pins Percy under a beady glare. Are you trustworthy? Percy coughs and hopes his ears are not tinged red. I believe so. I told you, Mr. Crouch, that I think someone murdered Amos, and all he did was warn me against spreading dangerous rumors, says Priscilla disdainfully, flicking her wand savagely to clean the small ring of water left on the saucer from her teacup. Percy blinks and does the same to his, though with a gentler gesture. Madam Diggory, I would caution the same, he says delicately. I would agree with you that the circumstances of Mr. Diggory's death were less than innocent, but to make accusations without a suspect. It was either the bloody goblins or Lucius Malfoy, breaks in Priscilla, or both, working together. Percy resolves to get and find a time to chat with Bill despite himself, for the tale that Priscilla tells paints a chilling picture. Amos had been very close to having a final version signed of an amendment to the 1301 Goblin Neutrality Treaty, which all but guarantees the support of the goblins to whichever wizarding party controls the ministry under the guise of neutrality. Such a treaty would have in theory aligned the ministry with the goblins, which was in theory a powerful tool, if it weren't for the fact that the ministry could fall to the Death Eaters at any time. An amendment would have forced the goblins to disavow any traitorous groups to the societal order of peace. Percy hadn't heard of this amendment passing in the previous timeline, though he doubts it would have amounted to much in the end. Whichever party controls the ministry controls the narrative and presumably would mark the opposition as traitorous, regardless of what the truth may be. Still, it is precisely the type of optimistic nonsense that the light side seems to purport, all about idealism without any consideration of cold, bleak reality. But why would a goblin murder Mr. Diggory? Not all of them agreed with the amendment, explains Priscilla darkly. The creatures are not uniform. Amos knew that well. He was picking up on very worrisome signs indeed. I am liable to believe that Harry Potter. Why else would there be so much hullabaloo with the goblins and the centaurs and the giants and Merlin knows what else? Amos was working indecent hours trying to pin down the movements of each sect. Percy wonders if that was why Amos had looked at him so suspiciously, trying to gather information on the same. And Lord Malfoy. Well, he's a champion of yours, I hear, so I shouldn't say anything, I suppose, says Priscilla, her tight face showing clearly what she thinks of the idea. But he'd have a lot of money to lose in an upcoming war if the goblins don't support Death Eaters. Percy frowns and points out, but any of the Death Eaters could likely say the same. But Lucius was very interested in the bill, she says ominously. More so than even Barty. He was always lurking around Gringotts when Amos was there. Lucius Malfoy is as convincing of an enemy as any, Percy supposes, reading through his history books that evening for more information on the Goblin treaties. But if the amendment that Amos wanted to pass had gone into force, if anything it would be good for the Death Eaters. No. To have the goblins bound to help the ministry rather than remain neutral. Then he who controlled the ministry controlled the goblins, and therefore the money. Perhaps he will need to speak to Bill, although after Percy's last curt letter, he's not so sure Bill will write back. Dear Percy, Mum tells me that you're avoiding them, that you're hanging out with Malfoy and his lot. I know this must be a hard time for you, recently graduated, trying to make your mark in the world. But you ought to know that nothing is more important than family, right? And if what Harry says is true, family will become more important than ever. I do not know much about the amendment. Diggory may have thought it was close to passing, but I'm not so sure, to be honest. Once you learn a bit more about how the goblins interact, you'll see that this amendment wouldn't change any of their behavior anyway. They always claim neutrality, even as they ally themselves with the strongest punitive power, since the Treaty of 602 forbids goblins from harming a magical being directly. I suppose if the amendment did pass, the goblins would be bound to refuse Death Eaters access to their vaults if they were convicted. It's hard to say. The goblins are definitely aware that something is going on, and they've closed ranks even more now that Diggory's been allegedly murdered. Shall we meet next week? I have someone I'd like you to meet. I think you already met her, actually, but don't tell Mum. We're actually going rather steady. Do you remember Fleur from the tournament? Love, Bill Weasley, would you say your mother is a surrogate mother for Potter? I'm sorry. If she could see reason, do you think she could control the boy? Minister, my mother, cannot even control her own sons. I don't think she has much say over what Potter does either. And what of your older brothers? William and Charles? Are they Dumbledores as well? I do not believe either Bill or Charlie ever met Dumbledore. They've both been out of the country, though Bill now works at Gringotts. Neither of them are particularly fond of Potter either. They've got more sense than the rest of them. Dear Bill, you ought to be more careful with what you say and who you say it to. Thank you. Best of wishes to you and Fleur. Perhaps we can meet closer to the holidays. Percy *, November 1995. Bill's response is somehow even more condescending than the first, and Tom watches in some amusement as Percy lights it on fire with a furious flick of his wrist. He seethes throughout the first half of his day, though of course his face is bland and interested as Fudge authorizes Umbridge with yet more power over Hogwarts. Percy wonders if Fudge can see that Umbridge is clearly angling to decree herself into the minister's office, but then irritatedly decides he does not care if Fudge wishes to cast his own grave-digging charm. And then, when he finds Tonk's office empty at lunch again, he struggles to prevent himself from lighting anything else on fire, too. Hermes finds him after the lunch hour, interrupting his desultory effort to reply to all of the correspondence that Crouch seems to find it acceptable to ignore. Percy wonders if Crouch was always like this, arrogant enough to maintain control over an entire department without doing a single minute of work, or whether this behavior is because the man now has a burgeoning war to command his attention. This letter is from Snape, and Percy puzzles over it for a few seconds. Insultingly, Snape has sent a recipe containing Percy's proposed changes to Pepper Up that manages to contain a cipher requiring considerable knowledge of arithmancy to decipher, while remaining an entirely valid and honestly rather brilliant recipe variation of which Percy is deeply envious. Even the old scholarly joy of finally uncovering the correct answer does little to correct the black mood that seems to hover so persistently over Percy these days. The deciphered recipe confirms that the Dark Lord is now in the Lake of Narcissus, which Percy takes to mean Malfoy Manor. Absently, Percy burns this letter as well, though with significantly less rage than he'd destroyed Bill's. Narcissa has not written to him in many days. Percy does not write either. The mild bond of their association cannot withstand a Dark Lord in her sitting room. Nevertheless, he feels a spark of worry for her, that lovely woman, forced to entertain the darkest wizard of their time. Unable to concentrate, Percy takes an extended break to walk by his father's department. Percy had never visited Arthur in the hospital in the first timeline, to his everlasting shame, but he knows the broad strokes of it. His father, in hospital, struggling to survive, harmed on some futile errand for the Order. In this timeline, Percy may not be able to prevent his father from working late or running errands for Dumbledore, but he makes it a habit to check on Arthur, to disillusion himself and walk by his father every time he needs to step away from his desk, to renew his monitoring charms as needed. Today, when he lingers invisibly in the doorway, his father looks up as if sensing his presence despite the disillusionment charm. Arthur seems older than Percy remembers, and Percy watches as his father rubs absently at his temples with long, slender fingers. Percy has to swallow back the urge to announce himself, casting a quiet charm on Arthur as he turns back to his desk, and then seeing himself out. He begs off work shortly after, claiming a headache, and apparats to Little Hangleton instead of his empty, drafty little flat. Little Hangleton is cold, and the sky is grey and cloudy. Percy shivers and casts a small warming charm. He wishes he could have taken Tonks or Charlie, both for company, and because he has a vague plan of chatting up some locals in a bar. But both of them are, of course, unavailable, though he supposes Charlie has the excuse that he's out of the country. Percy arrives alone with a quiet pop in the corner of the graveyard, looking around him with interest. Whatever dark and dangerous ritual was performed here last June left no trace, save for perhaps some mud at Tom Riddle S.R.'s grave. Percy makes a note nevertheless, and then turns to look at the great, quiet manor house hovering forebodingly on the opposite hill. He has at least an hour or two of light, and so he steels himself, transforms into a lynx, and creeps up to the front door, feeling a slight rush of exhilaration as his mind snaps into focus. It's open, oddly enough, and he feels his ears flatten against his head at the thought. All it must mean is that the local townspeople went sleuthing, he tells himself. Likely all he'll find are teenagers causing trouble. He creeps in. What he smells first, of course, is blood. But dried blood, old blood, blood that his lynx nose has no real interest in nor aversion to. He follows the trail of blood into a large, drafty living room with a grated fireplace. Sniffing around the fireplace, he notes there is ash, but he is no expert, even as a lynx, in deducing how old the ash may be. One thing does stall him. Coiled in the corner of the room is a large, discarded snakeskin, eerily intact. It reminds him of the basilisk, twisted and eerily translucent in the dark halls of the chamber. Percy sniffs cautiously at it and then transforms back long enough to cut a piece of it to examine later. He has an uncomfortable feeling that he knows precisely what snake shed this skin. The rest of the manor, as far as he can see, has not been disturbed for many years. A thick layer of dust lays protectively around the various surfaces. Not even the doorknobs have been disturbed. It seems that even the local youth avoid the place, if they can even see it at all. Percy does not sense any active wards, but perhaps there are some too subtle to be immediately identified. The house is large and grand. Dozens of still Muggle portraits line the halls, and in some of the rooms Percy noses into, silver shields and swords and jewelry are laid out enticingly. Perhaps they are cursed. No, he cannot imagine Muggles entering the manor and leaving these goods untouched. Whether a spell or merely their own intuition, something is warning those Muggles to stay far away. Percy transforms again once he's back in the room with the snake skin. He casts a few preliminary spells to ensure what he already knows. He's alone in the house. Then he begins to go through his impressive arsenal of detection spells. As McGonagall once mentioned years ago, there is no real way to scry for a specific object, but there are certainly other ways to deduce if magic has been cast, if an object is leaking magic into the air, if something has defensive wards around it, and so on. Percy has made it his mission to become proficient in all of these spells, and by the time he lowers his wand again, he can be certain that the only magical thing in the house is himself, and the skin. For the snake skin glows faintly with what Percy would guess is the Dark Lord's magical signature, though of course without viewing it himself, he cannot be sure. The Dark Lord cast what seems like several protective spells on the snake, or so the residue left on the skin would suggest. Percy has a few terrifying memories of the snake gliding serenely next to its master, all of which make him shudder. Though, of course, Neville Longbottom does kill it with a clean slice of Gryffindor's sword, so the snake clearly is not invulnerable. It's weird to think of Voldemort having a pet. Perhaps he uses the snake for venom or as a weapon to attack. It is almost sentimental to imagine Voldemort casting protection spells on his snake, though of course Tom would likely say that he was just protecting a valuable asset. Percy shakes his head and transforms back into a lynx. With each transformation it becomes easier, and he requires less time to get used to the jarring difference in height or the way his senses adapt to his form. The best part about being a lynx is how far he can travel without tiring. He makes it all the way down to the village without even his breath changing into pants. Percy finds an unobtrusive place to change back into human and then looks around for the most likely place to find a Muggle who may tell him about Tom Riddle. As it turns out, the Muggles have quite a lot to say about Tom Riddle, and Percy barely has to deploy the little charm he has in his arsenal to get the information. The Riddles have ruled over this portion of the land for years, formally and informally, employing generations of the townspeople as servants and gardeners and drivers. The general sentiment is that they were a bit haughty and not very likable, though the last set of them, Tom's father, were worse than the rest. Tom shocked the town by impregnating the poor gaunt girl and then discarding her with claims that she tricked him into marriage. The poor gaunt girl. Percy interjects at this point, trying not to shudder as the tipsy Muggle next to him leans in a little too close to his breathing space. What do you mean, poor? He's accumulated 3 or 4 interested Muggles, all men, who seem content to tell him what they know as long as he continues paying for the drinks with Muggle money he had pilfered from the Library of Archives. One of them, the one currently inserting himself far too close to Percy, gives something like a belch and takes a draw from his tankard. Percy shudders delicately at the smell of the stale beer wafting over them. Muggle beer is no more appetizing to him than wizarding beer, not that he would have expected otherwise. In fact, the whole town is a bit grimy, The hog's head would not look out place here. He will have to shower thoroughly when he is home. Poor as a penny farthing, he confirms. Their whole family lived in a shack, Mr. Gaunt and his two mad children. They were mad, interjects another man, this one with scraggly red hair. Or at least the brother was. The girl never said much. And Riddle married her, shrugs all around. She always claimed they were married, but he denied it, says the first man. My ma reckoned he was just playing around, sowing his wild oats and all that, and then she got pregnant and he ran. Can't have a claim to the Riddle name out there, can he? Says the red-haired man wisely. Course, he never married again. For years Riddle said the gaunt girl was a witch and she'd hexed him, but truth is, none of our girls would have him, not after what he did to her. So the name died out, Percy says musingly. What they tell him next is clearly intended to be even more shocking than the revelation that the ancient heirs of Gaunt were apparently paupers living in squalor. The bastard son grew up to murder the parents in a mysterious double murder with no traces save the terror in their eyes, completes the belcher, widening his own eyes to illustrate. The matron at the Wolves went mad, you know. Always said she knew young Tom Riddle would grow up to be a murderer. Is Wolves an orphanage? Percy asks, alert. Third man, silent till now, glances around him and then lowers his voice. Used to be in London, but the building was destroyed in the war. Bombing, I think. The matron moved here for some reason. It was quite the shock to her to learn this was where Riddle's son was from. Died a few years later, God rest her soul. Percy frowns at this revelation. He supposes that the orphanage could feasibly have been destroyed during the Muggle War, though he has a suspicion Tom had more to do with that than the Muggles. But why would the matron of the orphanage move, implausibly, to Little Hangleton? Had Tom somehow implanted the idea in her head? Muggle minds are weak. Perhaps she had learned of Tom's origins and fixated on the idea. Apparently the woman had gone mad. Percy supposes it does not really matter, but it is odd, and something about the idea of it makes him feel a little queasy. He clears his throat and says, to distract both him and the men from the matron, "Is the orphanage still open?" The second man shakes his bushy head. Closed down when she moved. Apparently she'd been funding it with her own money, the poor bugger. Is there anyone who may have been at the orphanage when Tom was? The third man speaks quieter still. Nobody who'd admit it, but I doubt it. Not too many strangers around these parts. Percy decides soon after he's had enough of Muggles, and after a very long and hot shower, he settles down in front of Tom. Tom has never spoken to him about his family, but Percy needs to know, needs to at least understand where Tom grew up. He has a hunch that Tom hid a Horcrux in the orphanage. He would have if he were Tom. I went to Riddle Manor today, he says. Tom, who had been standing with his back to Percy, browsing his bookshelf, whirls on Percy, the tips of his robes flaring. Percy admires it, as he does whenever his portrait does something impressive. How dare you, he hisses, doing the now familiar gesture wherein he plunges his hand into his robes for his wand. Percy has not seen him do any wandless magic, luckily. The Dark Lord hid there for many months prior to the resurrection, Percy says. I had to investigate. You dare, Tom continues, leaning as close as he can to glare down Percy. You dare, but Tom can't do anything to Percy. He can't even leave his frame. Horcrux or no, he's trapped in the canvas, and that makes Percy bold. Tom, I'm doing the best I can, but you know we need the Horcruxes to bring you back, he insists. We've spoken of the theory. The diadem that trapped you was broken, nearly burned to a crisp by fiendfire. This was the only way I could think to save you. I do not know how to extract you from the painting without the Horcruxes. Tom's smile turns unpleasant. Why don't you paint yourself in here with me? Percy smiles thinly and ignores Tom's suggestion. He's not scared of this painted Dark Lord. You need to trust me, Tom. I made you a vow, and I'm risking everything to help you. I need to do nothing, says Tom. Return me to him. He's liable to destroy you, Percy exclaims. He's mad, Tom. We can all see it. He's killing his followers on a whim. He's obsessed with Harry Potter, and he refuses to even leave Malfoy Manor. With Abraxas. Tom asks, and Percy knows he's not imagining the way Tom's eyes widen, just slightly. It is so strange to sit here and converse with this not Tom, a Tom that Percy actually knows quite a bit about, who is nevertheless an entirely different person than Diary Tom, 16 years old. He killed Abraxas, Tom. Percy lies easily, instinctively, though he knows perfectly well Abraxas Malfoy died of dragonpox not too long after Draco was born. Murdered him and his wife right before their son's eyes when they failed him at a task. Tom narrows his eyes at Percy. I can tell when you're lying, you know. I'm not lying, Percy insists. I swear to you. I am made from Ravenclaw's diadem, Weasley, says Tom coolly. I know when you are lying. What I would like to know is why. Tom may know he is lying, but what of his other claims? Percy tends to err on the side of truth, but surely he has lied to Tom before. He will have to be careful, like siphoning small bits of glass from a broken glass without losing control of the spell. Half-truths, partial truths, lies of omission. He sighs and deflates, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. Well, he didn't kill Lady Malfoy, he says truthfully, but Abraxas is long dead. True, all true. Tom eyes him carefully and then nods, as if whatever magic the diadem affords him confirmed what Percy was saying. What did you find at Riddle Manor? Percy digs for the bit of snake skin and holds it close to the portrait. Only this, my lord. The Muggles are terrified of you. They speak of the murder of your parents with whispers. Well, whispers is pressing it, but Tom's lie detector does not seem to register the exaggeration. Snake skin, he says thoughtfully. I always planned to obtain a snake. As a pet, Tom's gaze sears even across the boundary of paint. As a weapon. Tom, I believe you would have hidden a Horcrux at the orphanage, Percy presses, but the orphanage has been torn down. Tom looks at Percy for a very long time. I told you much, he says finally, and some of the aggression bleeds from him until he is merely a young man with regal features. Percy quirks his lips. He's trying to take every opportunity to tell of their shared bond, to remind Tom that he was his only friend when he was merely a memory encased in a diary. You told me that you hated it, he says softly, that you hoped we would raze it one day to the ground. They did not let you stay at Hogwarts, though the Muggles could have bombed you in their sleep. Tom paces across the painting. It does not take a mind reader to know that Percy knows of his weaknesses, his past. Percy clears his throat and continues. I grew up in a hovel, he says. I often hated it. It's small and crowded and much too loud, and nobody in my family seemed to ever notice I was there. Tom sniffs derisively. Percy's pauper upbringing, his sniff says, is not deserving of Tom's notice. But 16-year-old Tom enjoyed hearing stories of Percy's misfortunes, and so Percy continues. My father is a Muggle-loving fool, and my mother an old and fat housewife. You promised me one day that you would help me burn it to the ground and watch them run. Well, Tom did promise that, though Percy has no intention of taking him up on the offer. When Tom meets Percy's gaze again, there is humor in the slight curve of his lips. Percy risks one final entreaty. Tom, I need you back, he says desperately, truthfully. I know we may never be friends like we once were, that you are older and wiser and do not need a 19-year-old wizard with an embarrassing last name, but I need you, Tom. I'll follow you in whatever way you want me to. Poor Percy, says Tom mockingly. No money and no friends. No accomplishments of your own, either. Percy bristles. I brought you here, did I not? Funny, Tom comments. I rather thought that was Severus Snape's doing. It was my doing. Percy rises to his feet, and in his full height he towers over the painting. I brought you back, Tom. You told me about your past, and only me. Tom watches Percy steadily. So I did, but I failed to see why. I cast my first Imperius when I was 16. I helped you command the Basilisk. I discovered the truth about your Horcruxes. You may use me, Tom, but do not dismiss me. Percy falls silent, his ears beginning to burn. There is something about Tom that coaxes his insecurities to the surface, the ugly truths he can admit to no one else. You are nothing beside me, Tom says softly, almost lovingly. Rage, little Weasley, for when I have returned you will bow at my feet. It takes everything inside Percy to not rip the painting from the wall, wipe that condescending smirk off Tom's face with thinner. Instead, he takes a steadying breath and drops to his knees. I will bow now, he whispers. But I need you alive, Tom, please. Later, after a very hot shower, Percy lays in his bed, staring up at the ceiling and feeling rather useless. He can barely remember what it felt like at Hogwarts, the first time, so anxious and eager to prove himself. Even the memories of Hogwarts, the second time, learning the animagus transformation, practicing his magic, forcing himself through years of potion tutelage, deciphering the map, and then making his own map, seem hollow and inadequate. only small feats of magic, hardly anything to leave as his legacy, and all within the reach of a normal wizard with some ambition. Percy had found the diary, and then he'd promptly lost it. He'd been to the Chamber of Secrets, entangled with the basilisk, but only under Tom's command. He'd spoken to the ghost of Ravenclaw herself and the bloody Berenicide, but all of those were for Tom, in the search of Tom, in the quest to destroy Tom. What has he done? Even painting had become a skill he developed just for Tom and not for himself. Even the portrait he made of his father had been practice for the real thing. His love of transfiguration, his knowledge of potions, his drive to perfect wandless and wordless magic, all for Tom, all of it, nothing for him. The last project he can recall working on for his own interest, and his own interest only had been the bloody Marauder's map. Percy can remember the rush of exaltation he'd felt, that first time, forcing the map to give up its secrets, untangling the complex web of spells across the deceptively ratty surface. That had been the first time he'd learned about a magical anchor, of a transformative force, of the intersection of ancient runes, arithmancy, and charms. Percy sighs and turns over, but the left side of his room holds no additional answers that his ceiling lacked. Well, he'd sent himself back in time to destroy Tom. Not for himself, not for his legacy, but to atone for his wrongs and ensure his family lived. He'd thought that Tom would help him with his Horcrux search more, but of course, why would Tom want to help Percy find the most vulnerable shards of his soul? Percy had been an idiot to think Tom would spring into the portrait, full of energy and snarky wit and helpful suggestions, even if his Tom had been an ally more often than he'd been an enemy. So, Percy cannot rely on Tom. He cannot rely on anyone, which is a familiar feeling, and not one more pleasant for its familiarity. First steps first, he tells himself, though the old refrain has lost some of its efficacy. But still, it's all logic, isn't it? And Percy is a logical wizard, isn't he? Nobody can take that away from him. Can they? He needs to find Tom's orphanage. His gut tells him that Tom would have hidden a Horcrux at the orphanage. He knows it's in London, but it's been destroyed, so there's no point at all in searching all of these nasty little buildings for signs of Tom logic. Something is beating against Percy's brain, but he can't seem to let it in. He squeezes his eyes shut as he tries to untangle the mess in his mind. Tom was in the orphanage when Dumbledore found him, so Dumbledore would know where the orphanage is, but of course Percy can't ask Dumbledore. Does anyone else know? Perhaps his head of house, Slughorn, Percy supposes. But why would Slughorn remember anything other than that Tom grew up in an orphanage in London? He needs an address, something more specific to guide his search. How can he find the address of the orphanage? Unbidden, the ghost of James Potter's laughter floats through his mind, and Percy sits up straight, clutching handfuls of his crisp white sheets in both hands. Every Hogwarts student receives a letter on their 11th birthday, addressed to their residence, in excruciating detail. Percy Weasley, the burrow fourth bedroom from the top left side, anything can be an anchor of anything, he remembers, and he falls back into bed, a warm burst of energy in his chest. December 1995, Tom, clearly, enjoys playing with Percy. Percy tries to indulge it as much as possible, and tries to keep his temper while doing so, but he cannot help but wonder if Tom has any intention at all of helping him. He will need to fetch the modified map from Snape to test his hypothesis that he will be able to use it to fetch Tom Riddle's address from the registry, but his preliminary trials are going well. The registry has magic to track each wizard's present location, but Percy believes he can force the registry to give him its history, too. Otherwise, there's got to be something that McGonagall or Snape has access to that would help him determine where exactly the orphanage may have been all those years ago. Right, Snape is a head of house. He ought to know. Percy exhales in irritation and looks around him. He's at the ministry later than usual. Tom's knowing smirk has been more difficult to deal with of late. From the looks of the other occupants in the elevator, he's not the only one avoiding some personal responsibility by burying it with the professional. His nose wrinkles delicately. At least Percy makes time for regular hygiene charms, even if he does sometimes run out of time to take an actual shower. Percy hates ministry elevators. They're always too cramped, have a tendency to shoot in jarring directions, and often one must endure the entire ride listening to some bureaucrat complain about bureaucracy, as if he is being personally slighted by an organization with rigid rules. This elevator is no different. Percy groans to himself when he sees the mottled green and brown robes of the magical creatures division. They're on the south wing, and he needs to be on the east, meaning they will make an entirely unnecessary detour that involves, if he remembers correctly from his research into werewolves, at least one sickening drop. It was too late by the time we got there. One of them, a tall, stocky sort of woman with tightly pinned black hair, tells her colleague. He shakes his head. I know we're not saying the word, he says, lowering his voice, but it smacks of them. Who else would know to go to the Gurg to present the gifts? They're speaking of giants, Percy realizes in a flash. He knows the word Gurg, the leader of the giants, as he'd explained in his paper to Crouch. More importantly, they're speaking of the ministry effort to win allies among the giants. The woman sighs, twisting her finger in the lapel of her robes. Bloody shame, really, she sighs. At least the pack may still come around. Not likely, her partner says. Without the potion, we've not got a bargaining chip. You think they'll think to give the potion? That's what I'm afraid of, he says grimly, before the sickening screech of the elevator dropping 5 floors in rapid succession makes conversation briefly impossible. Percy collects himself from where he'd fallen into the railing and watches as the two make their way out of the elevator. The latter exchange had to be about the werewolves, but Percy had specifically included in his report that the ministry needed to provide the wolfsbane potion, otherwise they'd have nothing with which to negotiate. Had his work all been for naught? And why had he had to compile that report anyway? Percy begins to make his way out of the elevator, thank Merlin, and toward Crouch's office, his mind roving over the conversation, picking it apart as if it were a difficult exam question or dark ritual to study. Amos Diggory himself had watched him compile a set of reports on creatures under his purview to take to Crouch. Percy had been flattered at the time, but of course if the ministry wanted to approach the giants or the werewolves, not to mention the hinkerpunks or the centaurs, they would commission a report first from the Department of Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, not the Department of International Magical Cooperation. Werewolves and giants, goblins and centaurs all have creature status, not being status. Perhaps Crouch did not trust Diggory or wanted to keep his interest private. Percy is still thinking about it when he opens the door to Crouch's office. At times, the various departments in the ministry infringe on each other's territory. Quite often, in fact. It would not be so out of place for Crouch to task his clerk with finding information about a subject he finds interesting. For all Percy knows, some foreign head would want information on the werewolf populations of Britain, and Crouch felt it most expedient to ask Percy to do his dirty work. Except Percy had done that research, and Amos Diggory had died. Ah, Mr. Weasley, Crouch says, not bothering to rise from his perch behind his desk. You're late. My apologies, sir, Percy says automatically. I had an errant elevator. Crouch chuckles self-importantly. Clearly he's feeling better today, likely he just dosed on one of the many stimulants that he seems to keep on his person at all times. Bloody things, more trouble than they're worth. Percy gives Crouch a sideways glance and then decides to just ask. They're on the same side after all, and Crouch's magic feels clean when Percy extends his awareness tentatively. Sir, in the elevator, I heard something. Odd. Odd how? Crouch sits up slightly. I heard that the ministry has not been authorized to give wolfsbane to the werewolves, Percy says slowly and carefully. But in the report you had me compile, I'd outlined that as a necessary prerequisite for gaining their trust. Crouch gives himself a private smile, turning his wand slowly over in his hands. And I dare say it was. In fact, it sounds like the Death Eaters may be trying the same approach, Percy continues carefully. I think we ought to revisit this, Mr. Crouch. Our window to act is closing swiftly. On the contrary, Mr. Weasley, our window to act has already closed. Full marks for effort, though. What Percy lashes out with his magic, but Crouch is not under the imperious, does not seem cursed at all. A few things wiggle loose in his brain and collide, and Percy looks up in betrayal at Crouch. You never intended to act, did you? He accuses. You didn't want the ministry to gain creature allies. Crouch smirks. Well, that part is true, he concedes. But I always intended to act, Mr. Weasley. A pause. Percy swallows. His mouth goes dry. "You're working for them, aren't you?" Percy accuses, fumbling for his own wand. It's completely unbelievable, utterly absurd, but it does make a few things make rather more sense. He begins to back away slowly toward the still open door. "Mr. Crouch, please," Crouch says, waving his wand lazily in the air. The door slams shut. Mr. Crouch was my father. For a prolonged second, all Percy can do is stare, nonplussed, at Crouch. And then he shakes his head, because while he is not a two-time Hogwarts graduate for nothing, he can hardly believe what his intuition is telling him. The map, of course, the map does not lie, and Bartemius Crouch did indeed spend much of the tournament wandering the grounds. But at the same time, you're dead. Barty Crouch Jr. spreads his hands and bows. "That was a clever deduction, Mr. Weasley. Quick, too. I was right about you. You died in Azkaban." "My mother died in Azkaban, and she deserved it too," Barty says nastily. "One alive and one dying person in, and one alive and one dying person out." Percy shakes his head again, as if his denial will erase the truth. He would have noticed. He should have noticed. Had this happened last time? Had it always been his fate to work under a Death Eater and a murderer and notice absolutely nothing? Oh, Merlin. Oh, Merlin. His forehead is damp, and he realizes with a start that his toes are curling in his shoes as he struggles to keep his voice even. "And Bertha Jorkins, she discovered you. It really is a pleasure to work with someone so bright," Barty says. "He needed an innocent, you know. Please, sit." Percy sits, though he keeps his wand out. This must have happened last time, too, but Barty Crouch Jr. must have done something differently to cause his death, or perhaps his father's death. Maybe he made a small mistake and garnered too much attention. Maybe Crouch SR had fought back. Polyjuice, not stimulants. Percy really is an idiot. Cedric had even suggested Polyjuice. Percy had even had the thought that Polyjuice would be undetectable, given as it is not classified as a dark spell. So many hints, and for Percy to be blind, blind, blind. Oh, Merlin. "You did not choose Imperius." Crouch shook his head. "I considered it," he admitted. "But a true Imperius, an absolute Imperius. It's difficult magic, you know, and my father is rather willful. Better to keep him locked up. I've enough hair for years." He smirks at Percy, the expression out of place on Crouch's tired, lined face. "You gave me the idea, you know." "I what?" "I was at the World Cup that day," the man explains, twisting his father's face into a bright, crazed mask. "Under an invisibility cloak. Winky argued for me, you know. She told my father I deserved a break, that I was good. But little did he know I was ready to fight." Percy resists the urge to wipe his forehead. Oh, he can see it all clearly now. "You cast the Morsemorder." Barty nods readily, like a schoolboy eager for recognition, and Percy's stomach gives a sickening lurch. "I saw the wand, his wand, Harry Potter's wand, and I took it. But I thought it was all over. You were there, and my fool of a father, and Diggory too. They found Winky. I was ready to be caught, and it would have been worth it, to help my master one last time. And then I heard you say that there was no trace on the Morsemorder, that if I had walked away, nobody would have found me. And that led you to polyjuicing your father." Percy asks weakly, fighting down the urge to cry, or maybe to throw up. He'd just been trying to point out the oddity of the situation, but he hadn't thought anyone would take his words as inspiration. Barty nods again. "I thought to myself, what other spells are not on the ministry trace? What other gaps could I exploit? I researched it when I could. I Imperiused my father once or twice, but it was difficult. He fought back. And then I thought, magic is difficult without my own wand. It's difficult to control. Dark magic is magic of the will, you know, and while I had plenty of will, I was weak, too weak, from years of my father Imperiusing me." Percy cannot help the horror in his tone. "Your own father Imperiused you. For years he kept me in a chain of my own thoughts of his commands." Barty barks out, his teeth bared in a savage expression of anger. "I was weak, too weak, but I was always good at potions in Hogwarts. I learned that many potions were not traceable, and I thought, why not take my father's place? You will stay like this for years." Percy indicates all of it, the empty and dusty office, Crouch's old and lined body. "Not hardly," Crouch huffs out, and he suddenly sounds more like himself. Indeed, as Percy watches, he sees his boss transform into a younger version of himself, with a shock of dark hair instead of grey and a bright madness in his eyes. Percy wonders if he'd always intended to reveal himself, or if he would have taken the next polyjuice dose if Percy had not said anything. To take constant polyjuice doses, for years, it was suicide. It would end Crouch's life early, both of them. Every dose of polyjuice takes some of the drinker's life force, necessary to power the transformation, which was why it was such a restricted substance. Why would Barty do that? Soon, very soon, and I'll be free to reveal myself. Why are you telling me this? Percy asks abruptly. Yes, he'd questioned the wolfsbane, but his curiosity had hardly been so damning that Crouch could not have deflected him. Barty smiles at Percy conspiratorially. I know your secret, he whispers in a sing-song voice. Percy tenses and Barty laughs delightedly. Oh yes, Weasley. I saw you when your father was here. You hate him. You hate them all, don't you? They've dismissed you, forgotten you even, and you hate them for it. Percy is about to protest, but then he sits back in his chair, lowering his wand to show he is not planning on attacking. It's just like Tom at the end of the day, and hadn't this been his plan anyway? Show just enough dissatisfaction with his family to keep courting allies like Malfoy and Umbridge without completely severing his ties with Tonks or Moody. Crouch, SR, he'd classified somewhere in between, a light wizard who was nevertheless a cruel and haughty pureblood heir. I do hate them, he whispers, and he bows his head as if he's ashamed. He is ashamed, he supposes, but not for the reasons that Crouch may think. They're all so old and stupid, aren't they? Barty continues, twirling the wand with increasing speed. My father, your father, all of the old guard. Each side had a chance 20 years ago to remake the world in their image, and each side failed utterly. But we won't fail, Weasley. We've been watching, haven't we? And we know where they went wrong. Percy does not actually disagree with this, thinking of Dumbledore and the Dark Lord, even of Snape and McGonagall. It took 17-year-old Harry Potter to save the day, and he did so by some combination of luck, loyalty, and sheer nerve. Once the Dark Lord fell, it had been relatively easy to establish peace. The Dark Lord had left no sort of continuity plan, and in his arrogance had summoned his entire fleet to the Battle of Hogwarts, trapping them with the same anti-apparition spell that held the students in. Once the auras had arrived, it took merely hours to process all of the Death Eaters, and only weeks to establish a protocol for trials. A younger Tom, perhaps, would have seen the shortfalls in the Dark Lord's plan, just as a younger Dumbledore may have been able to prevent significant casualties by confiding in someone other than Harry Potter. For all of Lucius Malfoy's money, for Moody's military genius, for his own parents' social influence among the light, neither side acted logically, as if they had their long-term success in mind. Where had been the Order's system of safe houses, or portkeys, or dueling training? Why had they been utterly unable to save the dozens, if not hundreds, of Muggle-born wizards and witches condemned to death or Azkaban merely by secreting them away? How had the Ministry fallen so swiftly? Percy looks up to see Barty watching his face carefully. The man barks a short laugh and leans over the desk to extend his hand to Percy. You're one of us, he says exultantly. You told me of that boy's mudblood heritage. You've been helping Umbridge with her strategy to oust Dumbledore, and I've heard you've been building quite the nest of connections with Malfoy, Greengrass, and who knows who else. His reports, meticulously researched, with headings and footnotes and citations, are being used by the Death Eaters. His pathetic attempts to be noble to help the government to change this timeline in a positive way. Percy imagines Voldemort's scaly hand reaching for one of his carefully lettered pages and wants to cry. But he cannot cry. He is here, completely alone, facing a mad disciple, and if he does not believe Percy is one of them, then Percy very well could die. As usual, the urgency snaps Percy out of his panic, and he only has to swallow once before he can respond. I do not know what being one of you means, says Percy carefully, evaluating Barty before he reaches out and shakes his hand. He has to remember that the strategy is simple. It's as Barty said. He's already playing his hand for the Death Eaters, and that will at least keep him alive until he can take them down. But I am certainly not one of them. I'll introduce you to the rest of us soon, Barty promises. Course, not many know about me yet. I'm the snake hiding in the grass. Does Snape know? Surely not. Does Lucius? Narcissa? Have they all been laughing at him, the Weasley heir working for a Death Eater? He wishes he could talk to Snape or even Myrtle, someone that he can rely on to tell him the truth or something like it. You'll be free soon, too, Barty says. He lounges back in his chair, but that mad glint is still dancing around his eyes, and so Percy watches him carefully. Your father's on his way out, you know. Percy tenses instantly, his wand reappearing in his hand without a second thought. What do you know about my father? He's part of Dumbledore's precious little group, isn't he? He's in the ministry right now. Barty grins widely and licks his dry lips. Well, he won't be there for much longer. The attack, of course. After weeks of worrying about it happening, it's happening now, and Percy is trapped in here. He stands, but so does Barty, who now looks far less cordial and far more sly. Percy hesitates. His charms haven't begun to ring in his head. Arthur has not yet come to harm. Perhaps Percy can move quickly. He's not the best dueler, so he will have to rely on the only thing he can do, think quickly. What's the matter, Weasley? Don't you hate him? Barty stretches the word hate out into a singing taunt. Percy smiles tightly. You fool, he's practically Dumbledore's right-hand man, at least where the ministry is concerned, Percy says. Think, Barty, think of the success you're having now with your father. I could do the same with mine. Barty narrows his eyes and snaps his fingers, and a vial of Veritasrum materializes into being between them. Ignoring his surprise that Barty has the skill for such a display of wandless magic, Percy does something truly reckless and grabs the vial, tipping just a drop into his mouth. The dosage is 3, so he hopes with one he'll get away with a mild stretching of the truth. I swore a vow to Tom Riddle, Percy says, entirely truthfully. I swore a vow on my magic not to destroy him. He forces out the last word, the potion not quite sure whether to accept that Percy's vow to not destroy the Horcruxes unless on Tom's command quite qualifies, but Barty does not seem to notice, his eyes brightening. I know he has returned, and I wish to act as soon as I am able, but I do not know how my father dying now will help me accomplish my goal. True, true, true. Percy is nothing but skilled at the truth. Funny that a vow he thought would be his downfall is so useful. Barty stares at him for another long, considering moment, and then a wide grin breaks across his face, and the door behind Percy swings open. He's too late, of course. By the time he reaches the atrium, all that's left is a slowly drying puddle of dark red blood. His father's blood. Percy drops to his knees beside it. His charms are ringing madly in his head, so he knows his father is alive for now, but he'd been too late to stop it, whatever it may be. Hooray you, then. Percy flinches and looks up, but it's only a portrait, an older woman, her face stern, wearing the white robes of a hospital matron. She peers down at him. Did you see a man? My father, I heard he was attacked, Percy asks. The portrait looks around and lowers her voice. Are you one of them? They could be either Death Eater or the Order, and either way, he's not one of them. Please, he says instead of answering. Just tell me what happened. She looks at him consideringly and then glances behind him into the depths of her portrait. Percy has no idea what she's looking at, and to be frank, he doesn't really care. He doesn't know how his father was attacked in either timeline. He'd felt unable to face his family at the hospital, and nobody had ever told him how or why his father was injured. A snake, the portrait says finally. A familiar, most likely. His snake, Tom's snake. A dangerous snake, perhaps even a cursed one. Percy's eyes drop to his father's blood, and he swallows roughly. Had this happened last time? His father had survived last time, but what if the circumstances were different? A different healer at the hospital, a slight delay in his father's treatment, someone choosing an alternate spell. Any small change in the timeline could result in his father's death. Snake skin, coiled, eerie, and silent in the dark room of an empty house. But Tom might know what to do. Tom will have to help him. But why? Percy wants to use his father, of course. It will have to be true. Percy does want to use his father. He could polyjuice into his father. It actually is not the worst idea. He does have some improvements in mind for the Order. He will have to make this idea true before he returns to Tom and begs him for help. Percy takes a deep breath and cements that idea in his mind. He siphons some of his father's blood into a vial and looks up at the portrait of the woman. Thank you. At his flat, he pricks his finger impatiently and smears the blood over the wardstone he'd installed into the door, waiting for it to recognize him. Once the door clicks open, he flies into the room and skids to a halt in front of Tom, panting with exertion. Tom takes in Percy's sweaty and anxious self and turns back to whatever he was writing on the desk without comment. Tom, your snake has attacked someone, Percy says in a rush. Tom, do you know how to save him? Who? Tom asks absently, as if he could not be bothered to care in the least. My father, Percy says, moving even closer to the painting. My congratulations, then, Tom says. He scratches through a line in the parchment and then scribbles something underneath. I understand he was something of a burden to you. Percy inhales sharply. He's about to say something, anything, maybe even a spell, when he sees Tom's lips twitch, just the barest movement of paint on a canvas. He exhales noisily. Tom is testing him, of course, as bloody always, and if there's one thing that's true about Percy Weasley, it's that he never fails a test. Tom, I had a plan, Percy begs earnestly. He's mine to kill when I choose, and I was going to use him, Tom. He has information about my family that I need, about Harry Potter. Tom raises his head slowly. This version of Tom is also interested in Harry Potter, as all versions of Tom are destined to be interested in Harry Bloody Potter. Percy is so tired of Tom being interested in things other than Percy. Then why are you here and not questioning him? Tom, Percy shouts, and then forces himself to breathe deeply so he does not say anything worse. Control, Percy. Sometimes it feels like all he is doing is lying to various people that expect something of him. Which version of him is the real one in the end? Tom, I've been planning this for years. He tries again, and maybe his voice does waver, but he is also speaking the truth. Always the truth with Tom and that blasted diadem. He misses his Tom, 16 and clever and so much more human. I need my father to survive. Please, Tom, you're always saying I amount to nothing, and maybe you're right, but let me deal with my father on my own time, like you did. Tom smirks to himself and raises an imperious hand. You have a portrait of him already now. What? I can't. I don't have the potion, and anyway, it's not a true portrait. How do you even know about that? I can enter its frame, Tom reveals casually, and somewhere in the back of his mind, Percy yelps in shock. You're right, though, it's not a true portrait. But come, Percy, you are smarter than this. What do you have? His blood, Percy says automatically, withdrawing the vial from his robes. He worries his lips and then remembers. Some of the snake skin. Not quite blood and bone, but it's a start, says Tom. And a portrait, too. Come, Percy, what can you do? The portrait, Percy muses, some of the panic leaving him as he thinks of his father's painted face. But Tom, a life ward is incredibly difficult to execute. Tom watches him intently. There's an idea. I can't make a life ward out of my father, protests Percy, though in truth he could make a life ward, could he not? He could take Arthur's blood, and he already has Arthur's blood, and bind it to the portrait. Life wards traditionally are linked to items of great value, but if he's remembering his theory right, they don't necessarily have to be. They are not Horcruxes, they do not achieve immortality, and Percy has done enough research into this type of magic to know that what a life ward really is at its core is a way for a wizard to anchor his magic on something powerful to provide extra protection. The portrait is not in and of itself magical, but he can enhance it, can't he? The portrait is but canvas and paint, but he can coat it in something. But he does not have a suitable cauldron. Well, he does, actually. He has the tiny one he used to brew all reveal. He can even localize the ward to protect against the snake, though that bit of magic will be the most unstable. Perhaps he ought not to make the enchantment more general. Who knows what danger his father will be in over the course of the coming months. Highly risky, of course, but he can clean it. But what to coat the portrait with? A potion would be best, of course, but he will need to imbue the potion with power. Do you not have any protective amulets? Percy bats away Tom's voice, although he does have a protective amulet. Well, not an amulet, but an item of moonstone. Tonks. Thank Merlin for tonks. Percy looks up as the pieces of his plan bubble and hiss inside his head. Tom is watching Percy with an expression that may even be interest to see what Percy may do. Go, he says, and Percy snaps to action. Summon the lynx from its place of honor by his bed. Cast as many protective spells as he can on the moonstone, praying it will absorb them in such a small length of time. The Ammonophora spell, used to reverse transfigure an object into its component parts. It all comes back to resonance in a way, to the idea that one's soul and one's magic is inextricably linked. Heat the cauldron and melt the moonstone. It should be impossible to melt, but Tom's right. A small and controlled application of everlasting flames will do the trick. In goes the blood to pop and crackle. Just the smallest bit of snake skin, glowering green in the light of the flames, just enough to familiarize the potion with the feel of Tom's magic alongside his. Now the brushes. Where are the brushes? In their box, of course, tucked away in his desk. Now to meditate, to feel his magic, to summon his birthright and use it for his own means. This type of magic is beautiful, structured, clear, holy, even. This type of magic runs like lightning down his spine and springs into his palms when he calls. It's surprisingly easy to meditate. His father may be dying, but Percy won't let that happen, which means it can't happen, which means it will all be fine. "Well done, Percy," says Tom, and Percy screams in irritation inside his mind. "Get out," he commands, and Tom falls silent. He does not need his ghost memories of Tom to interfere now. He needs to focus. Percy needs his father. He wants to protect his father. He wants to use his father. He does not want him to die, not like this, not when there are so many things left unsaid in the space between them, lifetimes of anger and resentment and guilt and sorrow. Really. I can hate him and protect him both, Tom. He feels his magic bristle all over his skin and flow into the brush. He feels alive, exultant, his entire body thrumming as his magic snaps and hisses inside of him. Coat the portrait, cast the incantation. Accept this blood as a proxy for his life. It's like the summer solstice, isn't it? For the price of blood, one can ask for a wish. Accept this blood and guard it like a life. Rich wizards do this all the time. Rich, dark wizards, of course. It's not a Horcrux. Don't you want a Horcrux? There's nobody to kill, Tom. Percy snaps, and snaps himself right out of his trance. Arthur's portrait glistens wetly, and even though the potion is not entirely red, in the dim light of Percy's apartment, it looks like blood dripping from his father's eyes. "You are rather interesting," Tom says. "That is dark magic you just did. Very dark magic." Percy does not work up the courage to visit his father until just after dawn. He slips into St. Mungo's under a heavy disguise and creeps silently into his father's hospital room. It's crowded. There are at least two others in the room with him. One of them, Bode, actually works at the ministry. Percy wonders if he too is in the order, if he too got injured doing Dumbledore's bidding. His father is still, his face pasty and inflamed. He's covered in bandages, and he looks as though he's slowly being buried in them. Percy swallows roughly. "I saved you," he says as quietly as he can, releasing the words like an incantation or a prayer over his father's prone form. "But I should have been there faster. I'm so sorry, Father." Percy flinches violently and turns. It's Bill. Why is Bill here, and how did he enter the room without Percy noticing? All of his nerves are frayed from the wild, desperate night. His magic hisses inside him like a cauldron in turmoil, unable to settle into a simmer. "Percy, you came," whispers Bill, and even though Percy looks nothing like himself, his brother comes over to him in quick, sure steps and envelops him into a hug. They stare at their father's body for several long minutes before Percy shakes his head and turns to go. There's so much more to do. Tomorrow at the ministry will be absolute bedlam, and there's the issue of Crouch to consider. Oh, Merlin, he's been reporting to an actual Death Eater for weeks. He can't think of it now. His mind is full of the dark, glistening sheen of the portrait, of his father's life force bound in part to portrait, of Tom's painted face shining with exultation as Percy invokes an incredibly dark and dangerous ritual of his own creation. "Percy, wait," Bill whispers, striding quickly to catch up with Percy. He steers Percy into the small waiting room next to the ward. "Why didn't you come earlier?" Percy looks at his older brother, so young, so naive, and wants to break down into tears. He can't, of course. He has to protect Bill, protect all of them. "I can't," he whispers back. "I couldn't. Are you in trouble, Percy? What's going on? Mum's furious at you for some reason, and Dad says you're acting strange. Tell me what's wrong, please." "I can't," Percy repeats with more emphasis. "Bill, you have to trust me. What have you gotten yourself into?" Bill reaches out and clutches Percy's upper arms tightly. "Percy, whatever it is, I can help. People are watching me," he says, meeting his brother's guileless blue eyes. "Everyone is watching me." He hesitates. "Crouch is a Death Eater, Bill. Tell the Order. Tell them that if they act on it, he'll kill me." Bill ignores those revelations, shocking as they must have been for him, and squeezes Percy's arms. "Percy, we need to go to Dumbledore. We need to protect you." "They're watching me, Bill." Percy wrenches himself away from Bill's hold and stares at the only portrait in the room, an empty landscape. Bloody portraits, always watching, always living. It isn't right to cheat death. It isn't fair. Bill comes up behind him and lays a gentle hand on Percy's shoulder. Dumbledore can help. Like he helped Ron when he nearly died battling a chessboard Dumbledore set up to play with the Dark Lord. Like he helped Ginny, or any of them really, facing a basilisk. Like he helped them when Sirius Black and a werewolf cornered them in the Shrieking Shack. Like he helped Cedric Diggory, like he helped Dad. Dumbledore is concerned only with whatever game he's playing, and the rest of us are expendable on that chessboard, Bill. Don't be an idiot. Dumbledore is trying to win a war, and fine, let him try and win it. But being his soldier affords no protection, and if you think it does, you're a fool. Even you. Here Percy cuts himself off, breathing heavily. He had been about to say even you nearly died fighting a werewolf, but he can't give up the truth, not now, not when he's so close to the end. Even me what, Percy? Bill's voice is even. Even you have to admit our family is in danger, Percy continues weakly. Bill sighs and tightens his grip on Percy's shoulder. We are, he says quietly. It's obvious that Harry is in the center of all of this. He dreamt of Dad's injury. Some sort of dream, Ron says, where he was the snake. Percy, whose heart has not stopped hammering since he was in front of Barty Crouch, freezes in place before stuttering back into an irregular rhythm. Bill continues without noticing. And Ron's in the center of it too, and Ginny and Fred and George. And now you're in the middle of it, in a different way, it seems. We are in danger, Percy. But even if Dumbledore has a plan we're not privy to, he's not the whole order. Being alone won't save your life either. Harry dreamt he was the snake. Percy says, instead of responding to that last. Bill shakes his head in wonder. That poor kid, he says, seeing right into you-know-whose head. Into the snake's head, Percy says through frozen lips, his heart so frenetic through lying to a Death Eater, and the Dark Lord himself seems to quell at this strange news. Bill shrugs. Maybe you know who was in the snake's head too. Maybe the Dark Lord is the snake. Of course. Maybe he is an animagus. Of course he would have a form, and of course it would be the snake. Although Percy thinks with a shiver, that means that the Dark Lord transformed into a snake to bite his father. And why? What are they guarding? Something he wants badly, Percy remembers Snape saying. But he'd never told Percy what it was, and Percy hadn't bothered to ask again. I'll tell the rest of them about Crouch, Bill says. And Percy, just think about it, okay? We're family, and we'll look after each other, even if Dumbledore won't. Percy nods absently, no longer interested in Bill's pleas. What does he want badly? Badly enough to kill a member of the Order for? Snape walks into the room and both Weasley brothers tense. Of course Snape is here, saving his father's life. How does Snape explain this to the Dark Lord? Is he tortured every time he has to follow Dumbledore's orders? How does he report to two masters and not reveal his resentment, his impossible predicament? He'll live, barely, Snape says, and Percy's heart begins to hammer again. Weasley, come with me. Percy and Bill both take a step forward. Snape's eyes flick over them both, and he rolls his eyes. Percival, he orders, come. Despite everything that happened tonight, Percy feels a faint flicker of pride when Bill drops back into a seat. He follows Snape into the hallway. You have learned something. I am almost positive he made the other Founder's artifacts into Horcruxes, Percy reports, and hid one in the orphanage. I have a lead. So nothing new then, Snape says in disgust. I'm close, Percy says, passing a hand over his face. I'm so close. I just need a little more time. Do what you must, Snape orders. Percy eyes him warily. Snape had earlier been so insistent that Percy not succumb to whatever magic Tom still possesses, so he must be nervous now to suggest otherwise. What was my father guarding? Snape huffs an irritated laugh. You have not guessed. The prophecy, Weasley. Snape holds a hand, forestalling Percy's objections. I do not believe either it holds much value, but while he is obsessed with it, we have time to act. My father almost died, Percy says. Where was his protection? The Dark Lord transformed into a snake and attacked my father, and he nearly bled out alone on the floor. What happened? He was not alone, says Snape sharply. Then he pauses. The Dark Lord does not transform into Nagini. She is his familiar. Percy shakes his head to clear it. Of course the Dark Lord isn't the bloody snake. Otherwise Neville Longbottom would have killed the Dark Lord when he lopped off the snake's head with the sword of Gryffindor. Percy can't think of anyone less likely to kill the Dark Lord than Neville Longbottom. But why would Harry? He may as well have been alone, for all the help it did him. Is this what Dumbledore promises? Snape does something very unexpected. He grabs Percy and shakes him, just once, hard enough to shock him. Dumbledore is not your concern, you little brat, he says heatedly, gripping Percy's shoulders tightly. Your role in this is clear, Weasley. Speak to Tom and find the Horcruxes. If one of your family is to die, it will be due to your own mistakes and not Dumbledore. He is fighting a war, Weasley, and he needs you to win this battle, even if he does not know it. Percy wrenches away. To his embarrassment, he feels tears begin to well up in his eyes. Snape is right, after all. None but Fred died in the original timeline, so if any of his family dies now, the blame will lie solely with Percy's meddling. Crouch is a Death Eater, he says instead. Barty Crouch, Jr. He's polyjuicing himself to look like his father. I learned today. Snape's surprise is evident in the arch of his eyebrows and the way his dark eyes flick to and from Percy as if searching through an invisible memory. But his voice is measured when he says, I see. Percy explains it to him quickly, the reveal Barty's role in the World Cup. He thinks I'm one of them, Percy says, the disgust coating his tone. Then with some panic, Snape, I don't know what to do. You do nothing suspicious, says Snape at once. Barty Crouch is a loose cannon. I do not think anyone other than the Dark Lord knows he is alive. I will have to investigate further. Do not attract his ire. Say what you must say to have him believe you are aligned with his goals. He could kill you on a whim. But I have to keep hunting the Horcruxes, protests Percy, but more by reflex than anything else. I'm close, Snape. We'll have to kill him, I expect, mutters Snape, massaging the bridge of his nose with one hand and half turning away. But it will have to look like an accident, if there was a way to see what he knows. I can do it, Percy insists, though only minutes before he'd been thinking hopelessly rather the opposite. I can spy on him, see what he knows. Snape turns back to him. The Horcruxes are more important. I can do both. Snape's doubt is even more clear than his earlier surprise. Percy reads it written over the curl of his lips and scowls in response. I can. To his surprise, Snape only keeps him pinned in his glance for a second longer before he sighs and gives a brief shake of his head, his greasy hair falling to one side. You'll have to, I expect. What is it you need from me? I'm sorry. What can I do to help you? Snape says. Despite the conciliatory words, his tone is sharp, as if they are back in tutelage, and Snape is walking him through a recipe as if he were an idiot, asking rhetorical questions meant to force Percy's thoughts to fall along the same line. The familiarity of it steadies Percy. Now, like then, he allows his mind to rove, thinking through the implications of what Snape is saying. Barty Crouch is dangerous, particularly since nobody is observing him. He thinks Percy is aligned with him, and so Percy must continue holding up appearances to the same. But they have no time for Percy to waste. Finding the Horcruxes is imperative, more so than anything else they may be working on, and so Snape is not offering to help out of concern for Percy, but because Snape needs Percy to succeed as badly as Percy needs himself to succeed. I need to know where Tom Riddle's Hogwarts letter was addressed, says Percy. I thought we could use the map, which is anchored to the registry. Snape blinks in surprise, but thinks this request through, cocking his head as he considers it. Finally, he gives a short, brusque nod. The registry must retain the memory of the Hogwarts letters, since we are capable of sending multiple if the first does not reach, and we use the same magic to send exam scores, he muses. But this memory would be from many years ago. I don't know how else to see where Tom Riddle grew up, admits Percy, his face flaming. We need an address. Snape reaches into a pocket and pulls out the folded map that Percy had built on top of the Marauder's map. Take this. Do the best you can. If you cannot succeed with this approach, send me a letter asking me for a recipe modification for headache draft. If you succeed, send me a similar letter but for dragon pox. I will try my best, but I fear I will not be successful, as I have no reason to look at the registry, and the headmaster guards it carefully, for much would be risked to have the locations of each student open to perusal. Percy nods, gripping the map like a lifeline. Its familiar magic sparks beneath his fingers, which soothes him more than he'd like to admit. And my father, he will live. It could go either way, admits Snape quietly. The venom, it's quite dangerous. I've done the best I can. It's up to his magic now to power his healing. He had a surge of energy early, but I fear his reserves may be exhausted soon. Percy bites his lips and nods. Please, he begs the life ward, sitting clumsily in his room where he'd left it. Please do your job. The first thing he does when he returns home is cover his father's portrait and move it to his closet, hopefully out of reach of Tom. The second thing he does is brew himself a very strong cup of tea. And the third thing he does is stand in front of Tom's portrait silently until the painted figure deigns to give him his attention. My feelings for my family are complicated, Percy says evenly. Tom merely blinks and regards Percy lazily. But my father is mine to save and mine to kill. I have plans, Tom. I am your servant, but I am tired of being dismissed by all who know me. The life ward worked then. And I have enough of his hair for years of polyjuice, Percy confirms, though he has no real intention of using them. I have plans, Tom. I wish not to murder my father, but to use him for something far more valuable, his proximity to Dumbledore. Perhaps it is merely due to Percy's skill at portraiture or the efficacy of the potion, but Tom looks so lifelike, so realistic, as a smirk plays on his pale lips. I misjudged you, I think, he says casually. You are more interesting than I first assumed. I didn't want you to feel threatened by me. Oh, Percy. Tom's expression is pitying. I would never feel threatened by you. Percy clenches his toes together, but otherwise does not react. I have come to the conclusion that you are correct, Tom continues, motioning to the reams of parchment on his painted desk. I believe my chances of success are maximized by combining several of my Horcruxes into one. The locket is at the orphanage. Well, nearby, at least. A wizard like you will surely be able to find it. We shall need to find one more. The cup, Percy brazenly asks. Tom's eyebrows raise. Oh, you have been busy. Let us see. It is an interesting question, really, to theorize where I may have stored it. Clearly, I succeeded at placing the diadem at Hogwarts, underneath Dumbledore's nose, and I gave the diary, as you know, to Abraxas. I thought perhaps Gringotts. Tom's expression sours so quickly that Percy flinches in reflex. I never had a Gringotts vault. Why not? I would never deign to store my valuables in the filthy hands of goblins, hisses Tom, and Percy flinches again at the venom in his voice. Perhaps Tom never had a vault. He certainly did not have a sponsoring wizard before he was of age, and maybe he did not make enough money at Borgin and Berks to qualify for the minimum deposit on a vault with adequate protections. Percy feels abruptly sorry for Tom, which is always a rather strange experience. Perhaps someone else. Percy posits hesitantly when Tom seems unlikely to speak again. Not. I would not trust not with an ounce of gold, Tom says dismissively, some of the anger fading from his face. I will think more on this matter. Thank me, Tom's voice whispers in Percy's head. Right, of course. Tom may respect Percy's show of strength, but as he had made clear, Tom alone is the master, and Percy must always be the servant. He sinks to his knees and looks up in gratitude. Thank you, my lord. Percy does go home for Christmas. Of course, his family is not home, secreted away in the Black family manor. But Percy walks through the silent burrow and allows himself to feel something like sadness, or maybe loneliness. Dear Percy, Bill told me in private that he saw you at St. Mungo's, that he thinks you are in danger. Percy, we are family, even if we fight. Come back to us. Where is it you live, Weasley? Ottery St. Catchbull, is it? I hear your parents fled the place. Any idea where they might have gone? Your money is yours to do with what you wish. We can talk about it, Percy. I promise I am not upset any longer about the inheritance. I know we can come to a compromise. Think after this is over you'll change your name, of the double indignity of sharing both names with my father, but I decided it would bother him more if I refused to change it. Let the legacy of Bartemius Crouch be decided by me, but you could claim the Prowett name. I can help you with it. I know how much you value your job at the ministry, but you've got to see reason, surely. Promotions won't matter after you know who comes out into the open. There'll be no politics. I want you to scout out others that are like us, Percy. Young men ready to succeed where our fathers failed. We have potential, and the Dark Lord will reward us for our initiative. I know you'll do the right thing. Love, Mum. He keeps the jumper his mother sends him, but doesn't send a note. It's so cold, sometimes, in his flat that he can't bear to give it back.